It seemed that Israel was trapped between the army of Egypt and the Red Sea. Humanly speaking, there was no exit. There seemed to be no way out.
For more than 3,000 years, one question has refused to disappear. Did the Red Sea crossing really happen, or was it nothing more than a story passed from generation to generation? Empires have risen and fallen trying to answer it. Historians have argued over it. Archaeologists have searched for it. Entire expeditions have ended with nothing but unanswered questions. Yet beneath the silent waters of one of the world's deepest gulfs, a discovery has forced experts to look at this mystery in an entirely new way. It began in the spring of 2000, when a multidisciplinary team led by Dr. Leonard Moller arrived at a remote section of the Gulf of Aqaba, carrying technology that previous generations could only dream about. Their mission was simple: investigate a location many researchers believed could be the true crossing point described in the Book of Exodus. Expectations were cautious. Most assumed the expedition would gather routine geological data and leave with more questions than answers. Nobody expected history to fight back. As the underwater drone slipped beneath the calm blue surface, everything appeared ordinary. Crystal clear water revealed schools of fish, drifting through towering coral formations. The cameras transmitted nothing unusual. Then the vehicle descended deeper. Sunlight disappeared. The temperature dropped. Pressure increased dramatically. The seabed emerged from the darkness, and suddenly the sonar screens began displaying shapes that no one on the research vessel had anticipated. The control room fell silent. Operators checked the equipment again, convinced the instruments had malfunctioned, but the mysterious formations remained exactly where they had first appeared. They were not random rocks. They were not coral reefs. They appeared organized, scattered across a narrow underwater corridor stretching towards Saudi Arabia. Even the experienced marine geologists watching the live feed struggled to explain what they were seeing. The location itself only deepened the mystery. The Gulf of Aqaba is unlike any other part of the Red Sea. Hidden between Egypt's Sinai Peninsula and the mountains of Saudi Arabia, this massive underwater rift plunges to depths exceeding 1,800 meters. Yet cutting across this immense trench lies an unusual natural underwater land bridge known as the Nuweiba Crossing, a broad, gently sloping corridor connecting both shores, while deep walls of water rise dramatically on either side. For decades, independent researchers, biblical historians, marine geologists, and satellite analysts have argued that this single location matches the geographical description of the Exodus more closely than any other site ever proposed. What happened next transformed an ordinary survey into one of the most controversial underwater investigations ever attempted. Every new scan revealed another anomaly. Every meter deeper raised another impossible question. Were these simply extraordinary geological formations, or had the team stumbled upon physical evidence connected to one of history's greatest mysteries? Today, with modern sonar mapping, satellite imaging, underwater robotics, and advanced geological analysis, investigators are returning to the Gulf of Aqaba with one goal: to discover whether the seafloor has been hiding the truth for thousands of years, and what they uncovered beneath those dark waters may completely change the way we understand one of the most famous events ever recorded. But before we uncover what the cameras captured beneath the Red Sea, make sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. We're on the road to 1,000 subscribers, and your support helps us bring you more incredible mysteries, hidden discoveries, and history's greatest unsolved secrets. Now, let's dive into the evidence that has left researchers questioning everything they thought they knew. The research vessel remained steady above the Nuweiba crossing as the crew carefully lowered a remotely operated vehicle into the water. Equipped with ultra-high-definition cameras, advanced sonar technology, and powerful floodlights designed for deep-sea exploration, the ROV was connected to the ship through a fiber optic cable that streamed every image and sonar reading directly to the control room. During the first stage of the dive, everything appeared exactly as expected. The upper waters of the Gulf of Aqaba were brilliantly clear, illuminated by the bright desert sun overhead. Healthy coral reefs covered the gentle slopes of the underwater ridge. Colorful fish swam effortlessly through the camera's view, and the scientists watched the live feed with complete confidence that they were conducting another routine survey. But as the vehicle descended beyond 80 meters, the atmosphere changed instantly. Sunlight vanished, leaving only the ROV's powerful lights to cut through the darkness. The vibrant blue water faded into a cold, black void. Coral formations disappeared, and the seabed transformed into bare rock covered by layers of fine sediment. At the same time, the instruments recorded a noticeable drop in temperature as the vehicle approached the broad surface of the underwater land bridge. Throughout the descent, the sonar system continuously mapped the terrain beneath the ROV, creating a detailed three-dimensional image of the seabed. The live reconstruction matched previous bathymetric surveys almost perfectly, revealing a wide and relatively flat natural corridor stretching across the Gulf, while steep underwater cliffs plunged into deep water on both sides. Although the researchers had studied countless charts of this formation, seeing it appear in real time beneath the vehicle made the scale of the crossing far more impressive than any map could capture. The operators then instructed the ROV to move slowly across the bridge, sweeping both the cameras and sonar from side to side in search of anything unusual. For several minutes, the readings remained completely normal. Then, without warning, the sonar display began producing echoes unlike anything the team had expected. Experienced sonar operators know how different materials respond beneath the water. Soft sediment usually absorbs sound waves and produces weak reflections, while exposed rock creates much stronger echoes. Artificial objects, however, often generate unique patterns that stand out immediately to trained eyes. The new signals appearing on the monitors matched neither sediment nor natural bedrock. Instead, they revealed several isolated targets clustered together across one section of the land bridge. Each reflected the sonar far more strongly than the surrounding seabed, suggesting the presence of dense, solid objects hidden beneath centuries of accumulated sediment. Realizing they had encountered something unusual, the operators immediately stopped the ROV and focused every camera on the mysterious location. As the cameras zoomed in, the pale layer of sediment covering the bridge no longer appeared completely smooth. Beneath the surface were faint outlines that seemed too regular and too evenly spaced to have formed naturally. To investigate further, the ROV descended until it hovered less than a meter above the seabed. At that distance, the high-definition cameras began resolving details that had been invisible only moments earlier. Partially buried beneath the sediment were several large objects displaying curved edges, elongated shapes, and repeating patterns that did not resemble coral formations or ordinary rock. Their geometry looked deliberate rather than random, and as more of the outlines became visible, the conversation inside the control room slowly faded into complete silence. Once the dive was complete, the recorded footage was processed through advanced image enhancement software. For hours, the research team carefully analyzed every frame, increasing clarity and removing distortion caused by sediment and low light conditions. As each image sharpened, more hidden details emerged from beneath the seabed. The marine archaeologist studying the footage reached a conclusion almost immediately. The circular forms appearing throughout the survey area closely resembled ancient chariot wheels. They were heavily encrusted with coral, partially buried beneath centuries of sediment, and worn by prolonged exposure to salt water, yet their overall structure remained surprisingly recognizable. These were clearly not recent objects, and they did not appear to be random geological formations. The location of the discovery made the finding even more extraordinary. The objects were scattered across the surface of the Nuweiba land bridge, the same underwater corridor connecting Egypt's Sinai Peninsula with the coast of Saudi Arabia, a location many researchers have proposed as the most likely crossing point described in the Exodus account. The marine archaeologist also pointed to another important detail. Coral cannot grow directly on loose sediment. It needs a solid surface to anchor itself. The thick coral colonies attached to many of the objects confirmed that they had remained fixed on the seafloor for an extremely long time. Whatever these structures were, they had not recently arrived there. They had rested beneath the waters of the Gulf of Aqaba for centuries, perhaps even millennia, silently waiting for modern technology to uncover them. The discovery raised an even bigger question. Coral colonies of that size do not form in a few years or even a few decades. They require an incredibly long period of uninterrupted growth, meaning whatever lay beneath them had remained undisturbed on the seafloor for centuries, possibly much longer. Even more surprising was what the sonar data revealed next. At first, the research team assumed the unusual readings represented only a handful of scattered objects. To eliminate the possibility of an equipment error, they repeated the sonar sweep across the same section of the underwater land bridge. The results were virtually identical. The anomalies were not isolated discoveries. They were everywhere. Dense objects appeared across a broad stretch of the crossing, forming a distribution that looked far more like the remains of a single catastrophic event than random debris slowly collecting over time. It was a pattern that immediately caught everyone's attention. According to the biblical account of Exodus, Pharaoh's army entered the path through the divided sea with horses, chariots, and soldiers in pursuit of the Israelites. Before they could reach the opposite shore, the waters returned, swallowing the entire force. If that event truly occurred at the Nuweiba crossing, then this underwater land bridge is exactly where the physical evidence would be expected to rest today. The drone had clearly located something unusual, but the idea that this site could be the real crossing point was far from new. For decades, independent researchers had been pointing toward the Gulf of Aqaba as the strongest geographical candidate. During the 1970s and 1980s, several investigators reached the same conclusion through completely different lines of research. Among the most well-known was Ron Wyatt, an amateur explorer whose work became one of the most controversial subjects in biblical archaeology. After conducting underwater dives at the Nuweiba crossing, Wyatt claimed he had discovered ancient chariot wheels and other unusual objects resting on the seabed. His conclusions were rejected by much of the academic community. Critics questioned his methods and often dismissed his work because he lacked formal archaeological credentials and openly connected his research to biblical history. As a result, many of his claims were set aside long before they received detailed scientific examination. Years later, advances in satellite imaging began revealing something unexpected. Independent geological surveys confirmed the existence of the underwater land bridge exactly where Wyatt had claimed it was located. Bathymetric mapping, conducted for purposes unrelated to biblical research, showed a broad natural corridor stretching across the Gulf with extremely deep water on both sides. The approach from both Egypt and Saudi Arabia also appeared unusually gradual, creating a route capable of accommodating the movement of large groups without major geographical obstacles. These findings were based on modern geological data rather than religious interpretation, giving researchers a new reason to revisit the location. In the early 2000s, another research team received limited permission to conduct underwater investigations near the site. During those dives, cameras captured several coral-covered objects resting on the seabed, including one structure that some researchers interpreted as a wheel with visible spokes. That conclusion immediately became the subject of debate, and the footage never reached a wide audience. Shortly afterward, Saudi authorities imposed stricter restrictions on research within the region, making further investigations increasingly difficult because of the site's historical and religious sensitivity. The latest expedition followed a different approach. Operating from international waters near the edge of the crossing, the research team avoided the legal restrictions that had limited previous surveys. More importantly, modern sonar technology allowed them to create the most detailed map of the underwater land bridge ever produced. Instead of documenting only individual objects, the new survey revealed how those anomalies were distributed across the entire crossing. For the first time, researchers could study the location as a complete archaeological landscape rather than isolated discoveries scattered across the seafloor. When the findings from every investigation over the past several decades are placed side by side, a remarkable pattern begins to appear. Different research teams, working independently with different equipment and different objectives, repeatedly identified the same underwater ridge, the same unusual crossing geometry, and the same clusters of unexplained objects. Every expedition faced its own limitations, whether restricted access, outdated technology, or skepticism from the academic world. Yet despite those challenges, the evidence consistently pointed toward the same location. Rather than standing alone, the latest drone survey connected many of those earlier discoveries into a much clearer and more complete picture than had ever been available before. To understand why this crossing is so unique, it's important to look at the geology beneath the water. The Gulf of Aqaba is not an ordinary body of water. It is part of a massive tectonic rift system, created as the Arabian Plate slowly separated from the African Plate millions of years ago. As the crust pulled apart, a deep trench formed, eventually filling with the waters of the Red Sea. Within that trench are several underwater ridges and plateaus rising far above the surrounding depths. The Nuweiba land bridge is one of these natural formations, creating a broad underwater corridor between the Sinai Peninsula and the Arabian coast, while the seafloor drops away dramatically on either side. Today, much of the bridge lies hundreds of meters beneath the surface. However, geological evidence shows that sea levels have changed dramatically throughout Earth's history. During different climatic periods, the level of the sea rose and fell significantly, leaving portions of the underwater landscape much closer to the surface than they are today. These natural fluctuations suggest that the Nuweiba crossing would not always have been submerged to its present depth. Long before modern coastlines existed, this broad ridge may have formed a much more accessible route across the Gulf. From a geological perspective alone, the possibility of this location serving as a natural crossing point cannot simply be dismissed. The deeper the researchers studied the sonar data, the more difficult it became to dismiss what they had found as ordinary geology. The map created by the drone revealed something that earlier expeditions had never been able to document with this level of precision. The unusual sonar reflections were not scattered randomly across the seabed. Instead, they followed a clear path along the center of the underwater land bridge. That detail mattered. Objects carried gradually by ocean currents normally spread in unpredictable directions over time. Sediment movement, storms, and underwater erosion tend to scatter debris across a wide area. But this pattern looked different. The strongest sonar returns formed a corridor, suggesting that whatever had reached the seafloor had done so during a single movement rather than through centuries of slow accumulation. While this observation could not explain what the objects actually were, it significantly narrowed the range of possible explanations and provided researchers with a much more focused direction for future investigation. When the expedition ended, the scientists admitted they had returned with more questions than answers. The mission had been planned as a geological survey intended to produce a detailed map of the Nuweiba land bridge. Instead, the cameras captured a series of solid objects embedded beneath the sediment, objects that no member of the team had expected to encounter. The marine archaeologist carefully stated that several of the formations appeared consistent with ancient wheeled vehicles, while the extensive coral growth covering them indicated they had remained underwater for an exceptionally long period of time. The geologists were equally cautious. They stressed that consistency is not proof. Scientific investigation requires evidence, physical sampling, and independent verification before extraordinary conclusions can be accepted. Yet none of the specialists involved could ignore the fact that the sonar data, the visual footage, and the geological setting all pointed toward a mystery that deserved much closer examination. One member of the expedition had arrived specifically to challenge the Exodus theory. As a professional geologist with no personal commitment to the biblical account, his expectation was simple: interesting rock formations, valuable geological data, and nothing more. But after reviewing the recordings throughout the night, even he refused to dismiss what the cameras had captured. His answer the following morning was surprisingly brief. He simply said that more research was needed. That cautious response reflected the attitude of the entire team. No one claimed to have solved one of history's greatest mysteries. Instead, they agreed on something equally important. The evidence could no longer be ignored. Perhaps the greatest discovery is not that the expedition found answers, but that it proved the search is far from over. Somewhere beneath the silent waters of the Gulf of Aqaba, the evidence is still waiting. And the next dive may finally reveal what history has hidden for more than 3,000 years. If you enjoyed this investigation, make sure to subscribe, turn on notifications, and join us on the road to 1,000 subscribers. There are many more mysteries waiting beneath the surface, and in our next exploration, we go even deeper.